Lady Chatterley's Lover with me, Morel Benard. Continuation of the story. I think the last time I said that she was feeling somewhat weak, and she said, I should like to sit down a bit, is what she said. Come and sit here by the hut, he said, going in front of her to the hut, pushing aside some timber and stuff and drawing out a rustic chair made of hazel sticks. Ah, I light you a fire? He asked, with a curious naivety of the dialect. Oh, don't bother, she replied. But he looked at her hands, they were rather blue, so he quickly took some larch twigs to the little brick fireplace in the corner, and in a moment the yellow flame was running up the chimney. He made a place by the brick hearth. Sit here then a bit, and get warm, he said. She obeyed him. He had that curious kind of protective authority. She obeyed at once. So she sat and warmed her hands at the blaze and dropped logs on the fire, whilst outside he was hammering again. She did not really want to sit poked in a corner by the fire. She would rather have watched from the door, but she was being looked after, so she had to submit. The hut was quite cosy, panelled with unvarnished deal, having a little rustic table and stool beside her chair and a carpenter's bench, then a big box, tools, new boards, nails, and many things hung from pegs, axe, hatchet, traps, things in sacks, his coat. It had no window. The light came in through the open door. It was a jumble, but also it was a sort of little sanctuary. She listened to the tapping of the man's hammer. It was not so happy. He was oppressed. Here was a trespass on his privacy, and a dangerous one. A woman. He had reached the point where all he wanted on earth was to be alone, and yet he was powerless to preserve his privacy. He was a hired man, and these people were his masters. Especially he did not want to come into contact with a woman again. He feared it, for he had a big wound from old contacts. He felt if he could not be alone, if he could not be left alone, he would die. His recoil away from the outer world was complete. His last refuge was this wood, to hide himself there. Connie grew warm by the fire, which he had made too big. Then she grew hot. She went and sat on the stool in the doorway, watching the man at work. He seemed not to notice her, but he knew. Yet he worked on, as if absorbedly, and his brown dog sat on a tail near him and surveyed the untrustworthy world. Slender, quiet, and quick. The man finished the coupe he was making, turned it over, tried the sliding door, then set it aside. Then he rose, went for an old coupe, and took it to the chopping log where he was working. Crouching, he tried the bars, some broke in his hands. He began to draw the nails, then he turned the coupe over and deliberately, and then he gave absolutely no sign of awareness of the woman's presence. So Connie watched him fixedly, and the same solitary aloneness she had seen in him naked, she now saw in him clothed, solitary and intent, like an animal that works alone, but also brooding, like a soul that recoils away from all human contact. Silently, patiently, he was recoiling away from her, even now. It was the stillness and the timeless sort of patience in a man, impatient and passionate, that touched Connie's womb. She saw it in his bent head, the quick, quiet hand, the crouching of his slender, sensitive loins. Something patient and withdrawn. She felt His experience had been deeper and wider than her own, much deeper and wider and perhaps more deadly. And this relieved her of herself. She felt almost irresponsible. So she sat in the doorway of a hut in a dream, utterly unaware of time and of particular circumstances. She was so drifted away that he glanced up at her quickly and saw the utterly still, waiting look on her face. To him, it was a look of waiting, and a little thin tongue of fire suddenly flickered in his loins, at the root of his back, and he groaned in spirit. He dreaded with a repulsion almost of death any further close human contact. He wished above all things she would go away and leave him to his own privacy. He dreaded her will, her female will, and her modern female insistency. And above all, he dreaded her cool, upper-class impudence of having her own way. For after all, he was only a hired man. He hated her presence there. Connie came to herself with sudden uneasiness. She rose. The afternoon was turning to evening, yet she could not go away. She went over to the man, who stood up at attention, his worn face stiff and blank, his eyes watching her. "It is so nice here, so restful," she said. "I have never been here before." "No. I think I shall come and sit here sometimes." "Yes." "Do you lock the hut when you're not here?" "Yes, your ladyship." "Do you think I could have a key too, so that I could sit here sometimes? Are there 2 keys?" "Not as I know. There isn't." He had lapsed into the vernacular. Connie hesitated. He was putting up an opposition. Was it his hut, after all? "Couldn't we get another key?" she asked in her soft voice, that underneath had the ring of a woman determined to get her away. "Another?" he said, glancing at her with a flash of anger, touched with derision. "Yes, a duplicate," she said, flushing. "Happens Sir Clifford, you know," he said, putting her off. "Yes," she said, "he might have another. Otherwise, we could have one made from the one you have. It would only take a day or so, I suppose. You could spare your key for so long?" "I cannot tell you, my lady. And no, nobody has made keys round here." Connie suddenly flushed with anger. "Very well," she said. "I'll see to it." "All right, your ladyship." Their eyes met. His had a cold, ugly look of dislike and contempt and indifference to what would happen. Hers were hot with rebuff. But her heart sank. She saw how utterly he disliked her when she went against him, and she saw him in a sort of desperation. "Good afternoon." "Afternoon, my lady." He saluted and turned abruptly away. She had wakened the sleeping dogs of old voracious anger in him, anger against the self-willed female, and he was powerless. He knew it. And she was angry against the self-willed male, a servant too. She walked sullenly home. She found Mrs. Bolton under the great beech tree on the knoll looking for her. "I just wondered if you'd be coming, my lady," the woman said brightly. "Am I late?" asked Connie. "Oh, only Sir Clifford was waiting for his tea." "Why didn't you make it then?" "Oh, I don't think it's hardly my place. I don't think Sir Clifford would like it at all, my lady." "I don't see why not," said Connie. She went indoors to Clifford's study, where the old brass kettle was simmering on the tray. "Am I late, Clifford?" she said, putting down the few flowers and taking up the tea caddy as she stood before the tray in her hat and scarf. "I'm sorry. Why didn't you let Mrs. Bolton make the tea?" "I didn't think of it," he said, ironically. I don't quite see her presiding at the tea table. Oh, there's nothing sacrosanct about a silver teapot, said Connie. He glanced up at her curiously. What did you do all afternoon? He said. Walked and sat in a sheltered place. Do you know there are still berries on the big holly tree? She took off her scarf, but not her hat, and sat down to make tea. The toast would certainly be leathery. She put the tea cozy over the teapot and rose to get a little glass for her violets. The poor flowers hung over limp on their stalks. They'll revive again, she said, putting them before him in their glass for him to smell. Sweeter than the lids of Juno's eyes, he quoted. I don't see a bit of connection with the actual violet, she said. The Elizabethans are rather upholstered. She poured him his tea. Do you think there's a second key to that little hut not far from John's Well, where the pheasants rear? She said. There may be. Why? I happened to find it today, and I'd never seen it before. I think it's a darling place. I could sit there sometimes, couldn't I? Was Mellors there? Yes, that's how I found it. He's hammering. He didn't seem to like my intruding at all. In fact, he was almost rude when I asked about a second key. What did he say? Oh, nothing, just his manner, and he said he knew nothing about keys. There may be one in Father's study. Betts knows them all. They're all there. I'll get him to look. Oh, do, she said. So Mellors was almost rude. Oh, nothing really, but I don't think he wanted me to have the freedom of the castle quite. I don't suppose he did. Still, I don't see why he should mind. It's not his home, after all. It's not his private abode. I don't see why I shouldn't sit there if I want to. Quite, said Clifford. He thinks too much of himself, that man. Do you think he does? Oh, decidedly. He thinks he's something exceptional. You know, he had a wife he didn't get on with, so he joined up in 1915 and was sent to India, I believe. Anyhow, he was blacksmith to the cavalry in Egypt for a time. Always was connected with horses, a clever fellow that way. Then some Indian colonel took a fancy to him, and he was made a lieutenant. Yes, they gave him a commission. I believe he went back to India with his colonel and up to the northwest frontier. He was ill, he was a pension. He didn't come out of the army till last year, I believe, and then, naturally, it isn't easy for a man like that to get back to his own level. He's bound to flounder. But he does his duty all right, as far as I'm concerned. Only I'm not having any of the Lieutenant Mellors touch. How could they make him an officer when he speaks broad Derbyshire? He doesn't, except by fits and starts. He can speak perfectly well for him. I suppose he has an idea if he comes down to the ranks again, he'd better speak as the rank speaks. Why didn't you tell me about him before? Oh, I've no patience with these romances. They're the ruin of all order. It's 1,000 pities they ever happened. Connie was inclined to agree. What was the good of discontented people who fitted in nowhere? In the spell of fine weather, Clifford too decided to go to the wood. The wind was cold, but not so tiresome, and the sunshine was like life itself, warm and full. It's amazing, said Connie, how different one feels when there's a really fresh, fine day. Usually, one feels the very air is half dead. People are killing the very air. Do you think people are doing it? He asked. I do. The steam of so much boredom and discontent, anger out of all the people, just kills the vitality in the air. I'm sure of it. Perhaps some condition of the atmosphere lowers the vitality of the people. he said. No, it's man that poisoned the universe, she asserted. Listen to the next episode of Lady Chatterley's Lover. Okay, listen to the next episode of Lady Chatterley's Lover. I look forward to see you there because I like reading for you. So look forward to the next episode, Lady Chatterley's Lover. See you there.